everybody, and welcome to another Agile IT Tech Talk. I'm your host, Sean Spicer. This week, I'm joined by David Branscome once again, who's going to be discussing how to secure Microsoft Flow. About 2 weeks ago, there were a series of articles that were coming up warning people against using Flow in their environments out of fear that end users would set up automations that would circumvent security policies and controls. So prior to our last tech talk together, Dave and I were kind of talking about this, and he said, well, this is a really simple problem to fix. So he's going to walk us through some of this and show us how we can avoid that problem. Just a reminder, this is recorded. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the question box down below. For those of you joining us on YouTube, there is a full write-up available on our blog. And we then cut off at the end of the recording and open it up for Q&A amongst all of our customers. So David, how you doing?
I'm doing fine.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and just shoot the screen right over to you now, so we can get started.
All right. So yeah, we're going to talk about some things you can do to secure your flow. This is some of the basic stuff. There's things that you can do that are much more complex if you want to get fancy, but just to give you some basic ideas on ways that you can avoid the problem that Sean was referring to of uncontrolled use of flow in an environment. That's what we're going to be talking about. So basically, what's the issue? The issue is that in its default configuration, Flow allows you to connect services that may or may not be resident within your organization's compliance boundaries. So for example, what I've got here on the screenshot is a connection between a Slack account for myself, as well as an Office 365 Outlook account for my demo tenant. So I may not want my users to be able to transfer data between Outlook and an unmanaged Slack account. So how do I control that? So you might think, well, the easy thing is just remove the user's Flow license, right? Just move the slider bar over, and they're prevented from using Flow. But here's the catch. This is from a TechNet article, or this Flow Q&A. It says that the presence of a Flow license doesn't grant or remove any capabilities. So turning off the license isn't really accomplishing anything. The user still has access to Flow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So as it mentions here, Flow is just the license is just there for tracking purposes. So just unlicensing them doesn't really do anything in terms of stopping the user from making a flow. So the question is, now what? So there's a pretty easy way to secure Flow. First of all, you have to meet the prerequisites, and we'll go through those in just a second. Then Flow in the admin center for Flow has the concept of environments. So you create environments that contain business data, and you can secure those individually and grant users access to that data. And then you can create data policies that define the services that are allowed to share data between themselves. So let's take a look at that. So the prerequisites are really fairly simple. You have to have either environment admin or tenant admin permissions to do this. And then the user who's going to configure the Flow environment has to have a Microsoft Flow Plan 2 license assigned to them. So just make sure that you have the appropriate licensing, right? So by default, everybody gets the Flow free license, I believe, with the E5. Make sure that you have this the Flow Plan 2 license if you're going to be the one configuring the Flow environments. So the idea of the environment. If you go into your admin center in Office 365, there's a selection in the little waffle icon in the admin center that gives you access to Flow. This is not the Flow end user tool that we're talking about. This is the admin center for Flow. And in the admin center, you've got these three concepts, right? You've got the environments, the data policies, and the data integration. What we're going to be talking about today specifically are the environments and the data policies. So by default, you're going to have one environment. And this is the one that by default, everybody will be creating their flows in. But you can create new environments. So for example, if you click on new environment, you can define the services that you want users to have access to for certain purposes. So I can create an environment. In this case, I named it internal apps only. You have to define what region it's in and then what type of environment is, and then click on create the environment. And when you do that, you can create a number of different environments. So you might create one for Azure, you might create one for internal apps, might be one for Office 365 apps, whatever you want to do. But that'll allow you to kind of containerize, and I'm not using that in the terms of containers like in Azure or AWS, but just a place to put different services that you want to allow Flow to interact with. Then the next thing you do is once you've got these environments is you create DLP policies. So you select the data policies tab. By default, there are no policies that exist. So you click on new policy over there in the right-hand top corner. When you click on that, it gives you the option of defining which environments you want this policy to apply to. So you can apply it to all your environments, a specific environment, or everything except a certain environment. So depending on how you want to lay out the policies, you can apply them to different environments. Then you can go over to the data groups, and using the data groups, what you're going to see by default is the image that we see here. So you might think this is good because it says no business data allowed, and this is the default. But the problem is that, let me show you here. If everything, so anything that's in one of these groups is allowed to interact with each other. So by default, anything in this no business data allowed group is allowed to interact with each other, which means SharePoint can interact with Asana. OneDrive, the consumer version of OneDrive, can interact with Amazon Redshift. Azure Container Service can interact with Dropbox. And so what we want to do is move the appropriate applications up to the business data only category so that we can restrict access to those for the specific environments. So it'll end up looking like this. So we're in the grouping that you have for business data only. We might put all the Office 365 and Azure tools, maybe Salesforce, maybe ServiceNow. We want to allow all those things to interact with each other through Flow. And you do that just by clicking on the little plus sign, right? So you can define data loss prevention policies for individual environments. As we see here, I've got some for Azure and some for Office 365. And then from the end user perspective, this is what it looks like. So they'll be able to create a flow based on the different tools that they have at their disposal. And it's not going to block you from using any of the applications that fall outside the realm of what you've defined as allowed. So it'll allow you to create the flow, but then at the end, what it'll say is your flow was created, but it's suspended because it uses a combination of connectors that conflict with your company data loss prevention policies or billing restrictions. So the flow will still be created, but it won't be able to do anything because of the restrictions that we put on it. And so it'll look like this in the end user experience. It'll say activity suspended. Okay, so let's take a look at what that actually looks like. I'm going to drop my slideshow and turn on my Okay, so what I've got here is the end user experience. This is how an end user creates a flow. Now, what I want to show you here is a couple things. First of all, how do you get to the different environments, right? So I mentioned that you can create different environments, and each environment might have different data loss prevention policies. So if we go over here and click on the username, we see that I've got different environments. So by default, I'm in the Contoso one, but I can also look at my demo environment, and it'll show me. Click on that. Okay, so it's building here. So it'll show me the flows that I've created in the demo environment. So once that displays, you'll see that I've got a different set of flows, if I have any in that environment. I'm not sure. It's taking its time. So let's go over to the admin center. So the admin center here is where I was talking about creating different environments. So I've got my default environment, and within the default environment, you can actually add other security. So you can add security for the users that you want to be able to leverage this environment. So you can enter the email addresses of the users that should be allowed to use this, and then you can define the security roles that those users should have within this environment. So you can restrict even the people that can see this environment. Resources, this will tell me which flows have actually been created in this environment. So here I've got the one that that you saw in my on the other tab. This is one of the flows that I've got created in this environment, and I can turn it on or off. I can delete it from here as the admin, so I can prevent people from using that particular flow. So going back here, I'm not sure why it's not flipping over to the other demo tenant, but in any case, that's how you would go back and forth between the different environments, is that little selection there. So for whatever reason, it's not flipping back and forth. But within the flow, if I look at the flow itself, in this case, the flow is just saving. If I get an Office 365 email and that email has an attachment, I'm going to save it to OneDrive for Business. So all that is staying within the Office 365 environment. So there's no problem with that, right? So if I go back here, the flow, it shows that it'll work. There's no restrictions on it. Whoops, I just lose internet connection.
I can still hear you, so that part of the internet's working.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so let's go back here. So we've created the environments. We can define who's allowed to access those environments, and now we need to create the data policies. Okay, so if I go over here and I create a new policy, as I mentioned before, notice that I have the ability to apply this policy to all my environments or specific environments, right? So I've got my demo environment and my default environment. I can apply this policy to either one. I'm going to let it apply to all. And then the data groups show me all these applications right now can interact or be connected through Flow. So I may not want that, right? I may not want people to be able to move stuff from OneDrive to their personal Google Drive. So I might move OneDrive for Business up to my business data only. I'll say, I'm just selecting different ones, Azure AD, Azure Automation, whatever you want to select, you add connectors. So what this means is that when a user creates a flow and this policy is applied to the environment where they're creating that flow, business data is only going to be allowed to be transferred between these applications. So if somebody tries to move data from OneDrive for Business to Dropbox, for example, that's going to be prevented. Okay, so I save the policy and then I apply that policy to whichever environment I want. The data policy that I've got created here by default says I'm going to be allowed to create flows that interact with all these different applications. So when I show you the demo, what I want you to take note of is the fact that no Google services are configured here in this business data group. Okay, so this data policy is applying to all my environments. So that's going to include my Contoso and my demo environment. I'm going to go back here to my flow. Oh, and they're finally flipped over to the demo environment. So let's create another a new flow. So I'm going to create it from a template. Oh, actually, let me create it from a blank. It's probably easier. Things are moving slowly here for right now. Okay, so I'll do an instant from blank, and I'm going to call this OneDrive for Business to Google Drive. Okay, and I'm going to, I'm not sure why it's, OneDrive for Business to Google Drive. Okay, so the trigger is going to be OneDrive for Business. Okay, so when a file is created, what I want to happen, so it's going to connect me automatically to my OneDrive for Business in this tenant. Okay, I create in whatever folder I want, and I create a new step. And this new step is where I'm going to say, when that new file is created, copy it over to Google. Okay, and create the file. So it's going to ask me to sign in. So this is my personal Google Drive. There we go. It logs me in. It asks me, you know, do you want Power Apps and Flow to access your Google account? I'm going to say allow. And then I'm going to tell it where I want to put the folder or put the file when it creates it in Google Drive, the file name, and the file content, and I click Save. So it allows me to create the flow, but notice here it says the flow was created, but it's suspended because it's in violation of the policies. So I'm going to go back here, and if I go back to my flows, you'll notice it's grayed out and it's got the little cross out symbol there. So the flow will not be allowed to run because, as we pointed out back here, the data policies do not include the ability for OneDrive for Business to interact with Google Drive. So Google Drive is down here in the unapproved category, whereas all these others are allowed to transfer data between them using Flow. So that's one way that you can protect your business data from users mishandling Flow. Just keep in mind that it isn't a question of whether you license them or don't license them for Flow free. That's one of the easiest mistakes to make. But then you can also use the concept of these environments to segregate your data and how you apply the data policies, and then create the data policies that will apply to the specific business applications that you want to secure. So that's it. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Before we open it up, I have a question that's
Sure.
kind of boiling there, or more of a clarification. Now, if you're using data loss policies in Cloud App Security or Azure Information Protection, that's outside the realm of this. They can send out that PDF, but somebody's not going to be able to open it, right?
Yeah, this is all this is doing is preventing the interaction of these services using Flow. So Cloud app security is going to be handling things in kind of a different level, right? So
Right.
it's going to track whether or not you connected to Google Drive or to Salesforce or something like that. But this is where you'd control whether certain applications are allowed to connect to those services using Flow.
Right. Excellent. Well, David, thank you very much. And really, that thing about the licensing, that was really surprising and very good to know. I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to everybody who's watching on YouTube. Give us a like and follow. Again, you can check out the full write-up in the comments down below. And everybody have a great week.